Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Roche International, Bermuda College, and the Division of Science, I would like to welcome you to the 2022 Roche Science Public Forum. The goal of this event is to promote science within our local community while showcasing a Bermudian scientist and promoting their area of expertise. This year, we have the absolute pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, Miguel Mejias, an alumni of Bermuda College and a current doctoral candidate of the Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador. He is an ornithologist, a conservationist, and a naturalist, a very passionate one at that. And this is going to be an interactive talk, learning more about Bermudian birds, in particular the white-eyed vireo. And we hope that you will give some feedback as he goes along in his presentation and has some interactive spot questions for you. And any big questions, maybe you'll save at the end and we'll have a nice Q&A at the end of Miguel's talk. So we're very excited and I'm going to hand you over to this very passionate birder, Miguel Mejias. So welcome, Miguel, and thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Avi. Thank you so much. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm just going to get my presentation up here real quick. Share the screen. Yep. Okay. All right. Like that. Okay. So Amy, can everyone see my screen okay? I'm assuming it's a go.
You are ready to go. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Hopefully you will enjoy what I have to talk about. Basically, we're going to go through bird life in Bermuda very briefly, like what birds were present, what birds are here today, with the emphasis being on my doctoral thesis subject, which is the Bermuda white-eyed vireo. And then I just want to end the talk with just a sense of the importance of bird photography when it comes to record keeping and bird conservation. So before I start, I just want to acknowledge some of my support. I mean, there's no slide big enough in the world that can hold all the names that I wish I could mention, but by far, my most important support has been my mom and dad. Literally, I've never met another grad student who can honestly say that their parents were like literally their field assistants. So mom and dad has been amazing. When I was working on like the longtails, which have a bite like a pit bull and and they poop everywhere and they vomit on you, all the way up to the cute little Vireo that requires you to wake up about 6 in the morning, driving east end to west end, so much gas, so much money, but they loved it, and I'm really happy that my passion for birds apparently has rubbed off on them, and I'm very grateful for having them in my life, as well as all my mentors, Dr. David Wilson, who's my PhD supervisor, and of course my Bermuda College professors, Drs. Tracy Harney, Amy Harvey, and Dwayne Thompson in particular, and yeah, and all the people who allowed me to conduct Vireo research all throughout Bermuda, like letting me come on their properties and study Vireos. So yeah, so we're gonna dive into my talk. So I guess to start, I'll just introduce myself formally, I suppose. So my name is Miguel Mejias, and despite my diluted accent, I am indeed Bermudian. In terms of like higher education, I attended Bermuda College, where I got my associate's degree in biology. After that, I went to Trent University, which is in Peterborough, Ontario, where I achieved a bachelor's in biology with a specialization in conservation. My journeys then took me over to Memorial University in Newfoundland and Labrador, where I studied the white-tailed tropic bird, or the longtail. So I looked at their migration and their breeding behavior. That's that angry bird I'm holding in my palms right there. Fun fact, some of the longtails are actually back right now. I saw about 3 today, and yesterday some birders spotted some just yesterday. So yeah, the longtails are indeed back despite the weather. So spring's here, I guess. And lastly, I'm currently doing my PhD at Memorial University, looking at the Bermuda white-eyed vireo. So a question that I often get is, why birds? And it's a very fascinating question. I think most locals know, like, oh, it's just Miguel, he likes birds, cool. But I originally wanted to be a marine conservationist. So that would have required me ideally to have a diving license, and I could get licensed and dive and study the fish and the coral reefs. And it makes sense, right? If when you're a kid growing up in a place like Bermuda, I think most children who are interested in the environment tend to lean more towards ocean science. So I was no different. And when I was at the age of 22 working under the Bermuda Aquarium, I actually tried learning how to dive. And unfortunately for me, I could not master the technique of equalizing my ears. So I suffered from like extreme pressure, and I just couldn't get around that hurdle. So a week later, a friend of mine introduced me to David Wingate, who is a ornithologist and naturalist like myself, and he's the one who actually got me into birds and made me realize that there are careers out there. It's not just bird watching, and yeah, so I'm very grateful to him who put me on this track into getting into bird conservation. So that's so pictured here is David Wingate himself at the ripe age of 15 years old, and he's actually sitting outside of a Bermuda petrel burrow. That was a scene where the Bermuda petrel was actually rediscovered in Bermuda in 1951. And David, as a 15-year-old, was actually a part of that very expedition, and he was very instrumental in relocating and rediscovering the Bermuda petrel. And that was the infamous picture taken when the bird was finally pulled out of his burrow. And the reason why that bird was thought to have been extinct was because of human settlement on the island of Bermuda. So when the British showed up and colonization began in 1612, they literally decimated the cajal population. They ate whatever they could get their hands on. And by 1620, the bird was thought to have been extinct. Not a single one could be found. So, but there was evidence that there was a surviving pair somewhere in Bermuda breeding, and that evidence came in the form of cajal carcasses occasionally washing up on like some of the East Shore beaches. So David was a part of the team, and he helped rediscover the bird. And ever since then, David's championed this bird's conservation and protection, and he's literally laid down the foundation of seabird conservation and all the practices and the proper techniques into helping their numbers increase. And so much so that many other scientists studying seabirds, like the Bermuda petrel, have actually adopted these very same practices across the globe, which is incredible. Now, if you fast forward to the year 2018, there I am with the legend himself. So that's David Wingate there to my right. And in my palm there, I'm actually holding a bird called a roseate tern. Now, the roseate tern is pretty interesting. That bird was actually a historic breeder in Bermuda, which was ironically the last few individuals in Bermuda were taken out by a naturalist like David and myself. But the difference is we as naturalists today have a sense of conservation. We know how important every individual to a population, how important it is for the viability of a population. But back then, there was no sense of, well, if I go out and shoot like 1,000 of these things, surely, this population will be all right. But unfortunately, Bermuda's population of roseate terns was shot to extinction or local extinction. They still exist in parts of like North America and the Caribbean. But as of 1870, 1871, the last roseate tern was absolutely wiped out. And from there, we would record the roseate tern in Bermuda as like a rare summer vagrant. But anyway, in 2018, I was accompanying David on a birding study looking at the common tern, which is actually this bird here on my sweater. Hopefully you can see it. And we approached this island, this little islet in the west side of Bermuda. And these two roseate terns just flushed from the island, and they started attacking us pretty ferociously. They were pooping on us. They were dive bombing, screaming. And David was like, by God, that has to be nesting behavior. So out of curiosity, he put me on this island, and sure enough, within 5 minutes, I located a single egg that belonged to this roseate tern pair. And 3 weeks later, that bird hatched. So I love this photograph because I think it's almost like I'm having my own cajal moment with David himself, like rediscovering a bird that was a historic breeder to Bermuda. And if I ever end up in a relationship someday, I hope I find someone who looks at me the same way David looks at that bird. But through David, I learned a lot about Bermuda and its importance as a remote oceanic island. So here's a lovely satellite image of Bermuda. And so remote islands like Bermuda, they tend to receive their species from the nearest landmass. So in our case, it would be North America and islands throughout the Caribbean. And what's interesting about remote islands and the species that exist here is that they're often quite unique. So when they show up to Bermuda, they often change. They change into a very unique form, and we call this endemism or endemic. So you're going to hear that word a lot throughout this talk. So whenever you hear the words endemic, it basically means a species, some plant or animal that exists in a place that that's unique to that specific location, and it cannot be found anywhere else in the world. So basically, what happens is when these species colonize remote islands like Bermuda, so birds would obviously arrive on the wing. Some of the plants would arrive in the belly of those birds or attached to their feathers. Some other species like tortoises, land snails, skinks, they would actually have to raft to Bermudas. So they would maybe be floating on a piece of wood, and the currents would carry them to our shores. But the problem is, well, not problem. What happens is when these islands are colonized by these species, if they decide to stay on the island and reproduce, they basically become isolated from their continental counterparts. And through time, the species that decide to call Bermuda home permanently will actually gradually change into a distinct endemic species. Now, a lot of people may not know this, but this big blue, I don't know if you see my mouse, hopefully you do, but this big blue area that Bermuda sits on, the Bermuda platform, that's about an area of about 232 square miles. And all of that was once dry land, particularly during periods of the Ice Age. So during the Ice Age, most of the ocean waters would have been sealed up in ice. That would have caused a significant reduction in the sea level. So that platform would have been above level, dry ground, and that would have remained so for about periods stretching for as long as 90,000 years. So in periods like that, that platform would have served the foundation of an endemic forest in Bermuda, and the terrestrial species that colonized Bermuda would have evolved in that forest. But of course, during the interglacial periods, so these are the warmer periods between the ice ages, so that's what we're experiencing right now, obviously, the ocean comes out of the ice and the sea level rises, and that platform was once again taken back by the ocean. And during that loss of landmass, a lot of endemics actually became extinct, and only the ones that were the only ones that survived were obviously the ones where they were still above land, more or less. So that's one way endemics have been erased from Bermuda through that long period of time. Another one, a not so natural cause of extinction among endemics, is human settlement. So when humans arrived in 1609, the British, they brought with them many pest species. But even before that, they had an insatiable appetite. They would eat literally whatever they could get their hands on. And this is probably a good point to mention that island species are typically quite naive. You know, more like the animals themselves. Since they've evolved on this remote island for thousands of years without natural predators, they lose their sense of danger. Like they don't perceive threats at all. So that's what made them so easy to capture. So how do we know these endemic species even existed? How do you know I'm not just making this up? Well, so David Wingate actually explored a lot of Bermuda's caves in his youth, and he actually found the bones of these unusual birds. And what happens is when you find like a whole skeleton, if you're lucky, you could find like a whole skeleton. You would take the skeleton and compare it to specimens overseas. And if the structure of the specimen, say in Bermuda, doesn't match up to the ones in the States or wherever else you're looking, you've got a case that this is an endemic bird that's unique to Bermuda. So David published a series of papers on these different discoveries. So we've had an endemic hawk. Bermuda once had an endemic flightless rail. So a rail is kind of like a swamp chicken. And flightless is very interesting because, again, when these birds arrived and they evolved, some of them actually became flightless because, again, there aren't any predators. There's no need to migrate from Bermuda because Bermuda has a very stable climate. There's no snow. So some birds actually evolved into a flightless state because the conditions were pretty ideal year round. We had an endemic towhee, which is another kind of songbird. We had a night heron, the endemic night heron. So a lot of locals are familiar with the yellow-crowned night heron, and it's probably one of David's most controversial introductions to Bermuda. So a lot of Bermudians will be like, yeah, I hate the night heron. It ate up all the crabs, and I don't see the crabs no more. So the truth is, Bermuda once had an endemic night heron that actually controlled those very same red land crabs, the ones that used to like march across the oceans to like get to the shores in order to release their eggs. I vaguely remember when the crabs were at their peak. I vaguely remember it as a child, but I'm sure people from the 70s and earlier can remember. Oh yeah, I remember those crabs. So that's why David introduced the yellow-crowned night heron, because it was the most. It might even be the ancestral form to Bermuda's endemic heron. Who knows? But David figured, well, the night heron will fill the role that the endemic night heron once did, in order to help balance things out. We also had an endemic dove, and we even had an endemic woodpecker, which I think is really, really awesome. And also, in addition to humans actively catching and eating the birds themselves for subsistence and survival, humans also brought with them many different species that proved disastrous to the breeding success of our native birds. So we've got the great kiskadee from like the Caribbean, Trinidad. We've got the Argentine ant right here. So that's the ant that marches inside your house every summer when there's a drought. There's like millions of them marching in a row, eating all your food and whatnot. That's them. The American crow, the black rat, of course, the cat, and the hogs. All of these species actively predate either on the adults, the chicks, or the eggs of Bermuda's native birds. And of course, the star of the show, the one we're all here to talk about this evening, is the Bermuda white-eyed vireo. So this bird I have so much respect for. I mean, it's no bigger than a large chicken drumstick, and the fact that it survived all of this foolishness is beyond me. I mean, it survived the initial settlement. It survived. It avoided the predation from people. It's it's still here despite all the introduced predators on the island. Despite the fact that humans have pretty much eradicated the native and endemic plants all throughout Bermuda and replaced it with introduced species, it's still here breeding. And the fact that even today we continue to like nibble away and fragment its habitat by, destroying the forest and building up our houses. Building up our houses, we're fragmenting the forest, and yet this bird is still here. And in my honest opinion, this bird is an absolute champion to have survived all that it's went through. And just think of like a few slides ago how many birds I just showed you have gone extinct for one reason or another, and yet this little tiny little songbird is still here. Like, it's absolutely incredible. So what are vireos? Well, vireos are small songbirds with thick hook-tipped bills. The word vireo is Latin for greenish, or to be green, or I am green. So as the name suggests, the plumage of most vireos have some shade of green in them, but other vireos have shades of yellow, brown, gray, and blue as well. They are insectivorous and frugivorous, meaning that's just a fancy way of saying they love to eat insects, mainly in the breeding season. But in the wintertime, when they're not breeding, they switch to a diet more towards fruits. There's about 33 recognized species of vireos on the globe. And the vireos themselves, all 33 species are essentially endemic to the Western Hemisphere. So they can be found as high up as northern Canada, southern Canada, throughout the US, as well as the Caribbean and South America as well. So across the entire Americas, the Vireo species can be found. And there are three, and within the Western Hemisphere where we live, there are three primary migratory flight paths that these birds take. So we've got here the Pacific America's Flyway, the Central America's Flyway, and my personal favorite, I'm probably biased, I guess, the Atlantic America's Flyway. And I find this one, the latter one, very impressive because look at that line. So that's showing you that migratory birds go over the open ocean. So keep in mind, a lot of these birds, about the size of a vireo, and some are even smaller than a vireo, they have to, before they can migrate, they have to fatten up, double their weight, and build up a huge fat reserve. And this last route, the Atlantic flyway route, is very dangerous because a lot of these songbirds, well, a lot of these terrestrial birds, they're terrestrial, so they cannot get wet. These are birds that do not swim, cannot swim, and if they get wet, they die. So, and that journey could take about 3-4 days easily to get from their northern breeding grounds in Canada all the way down to their southern wintering grounds in South America. So, if a small songbird is like flying over the open ocean and it starts to like putter out, lose energy, and it crashes into the ocean, that's it for that bird. It's done. But check this out. The only hope of survival happens to be Bermuda, that small 22 square mile island in the middle of this vast ocean. If any songbirds are lucky enough where their energy runs out and they hit Bermuda, then they're okay. Oh, I should say there are still threats that obviously occur in Bermuda, but at the moment it's better than hitting the ocean, that's for sure. So this is just a sense of some of the species of vireos that do migrate from North America into Bermuda, passing through. So we have here the red-eyed vireo, which is arguably the most abundant North American passerine that migrates from the States and Canada. We've got the blue-headed vireo, Philadelphia vireo, yellow-throated vireo, as well as the white-eyed vireo. And we suspect white-eyed vireos from North America, when they migrated and arrived in Bermuda, we suspect that a male and female actually took up permanent residence on the island of Bermuda and decided to stay and breed and begin a population. And through evolutionary time, we suspect this bird evolved into the Bermuda race that we're familiar with today. So this is just a picture showing the two different, just highlighting some of the differences between the North American vireo and the Bermuda race. So in general, the North American race is much brighter. So the yellow is quite bright on the face, on the belly, and on the wings here. The green is also much brighter. Whereas the birds in Bermuda, they're still pretty, don't get me wrong, but admittedly, they're not as boldly colored as their North American counterparts. And another cool difference between them, and hopefully you can appreciate in this picture, is the light color. For some reason, North American Vireos have these blue, slaty blue legs, but in Bermuda, the legs are jet black. And another difference between the two that you cannot appreciate in this photograph is the wing length. So in Bermuda, the Bermuda white-eyed vireos actually have significantly shorter wings compared to their migratory counterparts from the continents, which makes sense. Because like I said to you earlier, there are some birds that actually evolved to become flightless, living in a remote island like Bermuda without predators. So the Bermuda Virio, I don't know, it might arguably be on the cusp of flightlessness, who knows? Evolution does take a lot of time, and as this bird continues to change, as long as it doesn't breed with North American Vireos, this Vireo will continue to change. And long after all of us are dead, this Vireo is probably going to look different than what we see today. And I predict that one day it will, as long as it keeps remaining isolated, it should change into something that's so drastically different that we can call it officially the Bermuda Vireo instead of the Bermuda white-eyed Vireo. And this change, when one species changes form, in biology, we call this like evolution. So evolution is basically the change in the traits of a species across multiple generations and relies on evolutionary processes like natural selection. So even if you're not a biologist, you've probably heard of natural selection. You may have heard of Charles Darwin, who's pictured on the bottom right. So when you hear natural selection, that's just a fancy way of saying the strong survive, the weak die. But in science, the way we define it is basically individuals in a population that have some sort of heritable trait that gives them a survival advantage over other individuals that lack that trait, more or less. And in a nutshell, evolutionary biologists suggest that all species on the planet are related and they gradually change over time. So Darwin actually drew what he pictured how species evolve in a family setting. So he drew like this family tree, if you will. And you can see he's got here the words "I think." So this is just him like hypothesizing how the species on Earth came to be. So he viewed it as a family tree, and that with any given species, you can trace it through it. So if you have a species and look back through evolutionary time, you should be able to find that species' common ancestor, and you'll find that all species derive from a common ancestor. That's what he was what he was getting at. Oh, by the way, you're probably wondering like, what is a species? In science, we just define a species as a bunch of individuals belonging to a population that are like reproductively isolated from another population. So you've got a pigeon and you've got a crow, two species. These two species cannot reproduce. Their reproductive organs are not compatible with each other anymore. So whenever you hear me say the word species, again, a bunch of individuals belonging to a population that are reproductively isolated from another group of individuals. So in science, this is how we draw Darwin's family tree. This is like, I guess you could say, the modern day family tree. So when you look at this diagram, I just want you to think of it as a tree for simplicity. So I pray to God you can see my mouse, man. So this branch here, so this line here, think of that as a branch of the tree, right? This line. And the arrowhead is a leaf. And at the end of each leaf, there's a species. So A is a species, B is a species, C is a species, and D is a species. And if you were to trace this line back here to this blue node, this is a hypothetical common ancestor. So the way you would look at this, you would say species A and B evolved from this common ancestor. Similarly, species C and D evolved from this common ancestor, this blue node right here. And when you have two species that derive from the same common ancestor, we call them sister species. So in this diagram, A and B are sister species, C and D are sister species. And another way to think of it is species A is more similar to B than A is to C. Similarly, species C is very similar or more similar to species D than C is to B. I hope that makes sense. And because of this common ancestry, sister species tend to have very similar they have very similar structure in their traits. So for example, this could be the number of legs it has, the number of eyes, the feather color, body structure, how long they live for, things like that. So yeah, sister species, again, because of their common ancestry, usually have very similar traits. And the last thing I want to point out of this diagram is the length of this branch. So you probably noticed that the branches of A and B are shorter than C and D. Basically, the length of this branch is basically a way to visualize, it's our best estimate of how long ago these two species diverged from that common ancestor, right? So the lines for C and D, the branch lengths are quite long. So what you would say is C and D diverge from this common ancestor much longer than A and B diverge from theirs. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you look at this very last blue node right here, if you trace the tree back, you would say species A, B, C, and D all derive from this common ancestor. So hopefully that made sense. So for my first PhD chapter, I had the daunting task of looking at basically how does evolution in the Vireo family affect the song structure. So basically following Darwin's framework, I tested a hypothesis that looked at the Vireo family tree, just like I showed you in the previous slide, the same structure of that. And I wanted to map the song traits onto the tree. And I wanted to know, did the family history, did this phylogeny predict the structure of the songs across the family? And sure enough, that's exactly what I found. I basically found that Vireo species that are more similar or more closely related, they sang very similar songs compared to Vireos that are more distantly related. So that basically supports Darwin's idea of evolution by common ancestry. So I thought that was pretty cool. So just some quick facts. So that's gonna be like the most complicated part of this talk. So if that made you sweat, relax, kick your feet up. That's the hardest part of this talk. The rest is gonna be smooth sailing, easy peasy. So should be all right. So just some quick facts about the Bermuda Virio. It's the last endemic land bird on the island. So the Bermuda petrel is endemic, but technically that's a seabird. So it's the last terrestrial species we have in terms of birds on the island. Locally, this Vireo is known as the chick of the village. And this name dates back to like over 100 years. So I hope none of you think like your aunties and your uncles came up with this nickname like 20 years ago. This name is older than all of us, and it's really fascinating. And it's great that we still use this nickname to this day to keep it going. It's a year-round resident, so the bird is not migratory. So we have the pleasure of seeing this bird year-round. And they're extremely tame, which is, again, very typical of island species. So the Vireo is actually a very fun it's fun to track in the woods. So the way they move in the trees, they don't do a lot of flying. They do more like hopping among the twigs. So the fact that they just like hop around and the fact that they're very tame made it like the ideal species just to follow. So yeah, so it was actually pretty easy to keep track of their movements in the woods. And by law, they are protected under the Bermuda Protected Species Amendment Order as well. So if you intentionally harm one of these guys, you could be looking at like a year or two in prison, or like at least like $10,000 fine. So yeah, don't do it. But who'd want to hurt that face, right? So in terms of their food, they mostly eat insects, and in the winter they shift more towards berries. So this food it includes caterpillars, spiders, as well as small lizards called anoles. And they're, for a cute bird, they're actually quite vicious in how they murder their prey. like the way they so when they have a caterpillar in their bill, they basically proceed to just to beat it relentlessly on this perch until the insides explode from the caterpillar, and then it proceeds to swallow it whole. Similarly, if it has like a moth it wants to eat, it keeps the moth's body between its toes and proceeds to dismember the moth by pulling its wings off, and then swallows the body whole. So yeah, it's pretty vicious. And they make these very loud. If you're a bird watcher, you know what I'm talking about. But when the birds are actually feeding in the foliage, they actually make a sound, like you can hear their bills snapping amongst the foliage. So that's another way you can actually track them when you're trying to keep an eye out for the vireos. So basically, my PhD, I had three primary goals. I want to look at the evolutionary relationships with the Bermuda Vireo. I want to look at their breeding biology and their vocal behavior, particularly the function of their songs and their calls. So this is probably one of my favorite pictures ever taken of me. A buddy of mine just snapped it, and I didn't even know he was going to take a picture of me. I brought him along to take pictures of the Vireo, but I just thought this was such a cool shot. But what's interesting is studying a bird like the Vireo was fascinating in that there wasn't much known about it. So I literally didn't know what I was doing. There was no papers on the Bermuda Vireo. There was no no documents, nothing. So I literally had to like just learn on the fly. And I'm sure David felt the same way studying the Bermuda petrel. And what's also fascinating is I'm standing in the middle of the woods surrounded by introduced invasive trees. And yet this Vireo is still with us breeding. It's just adapted to this alien foliage that we've, produced across the island. So about 95% of Bermuda's like plants on the mainland of Bermuda are like introduced invasive species. And the fact that this bird is still here breeding successfully just blows my mind. So in the field, I'd be armed with a GPS so I could track my Vireos. I had a field notebook to write down notes, and I have these fancy Swarovski binoculars so I could have, obviously keep an eye on what they're doing. And I had this shotgun microphone to record their vocal behavior. So to catch the Vireos, I would actually use something called a mist net. So my mentor, Paul Watson, he began mist netting birds again, I believe, in 2015. And a mist net is basically an oversized, you can think of it as like an oversized badminton net suspended between two poles. And it runs about 30 meters. So you have to cut like a net rise, or in other words, you have to open up the foliage a bit, a little narrow corridor, and just run this net through that corridor. And you have two options. You can either just put the net up and hope the bird flies into it, or you could do what I did, and I took advantage of the fact that the Vireos are very, very territorial. So I put the net up, and I had a speaker and an iPod, and I would play some of the Vireo songs that I recorded previously, and literally within a minute or two, the owner of that territory or wherever I was misstanding would just fly right into the net. And once they hit the net, they just hang upside down just like this. And they're pretty helpless. But once you take them out, we fit these different leg bands on their legs for individual recognition. And if you notice, the bird in the middle has brown eyes. So this is indicative of a juvenile. So the white-eyed vireo usually takes about anywhere from like a year to 3 years to obtain that beautiful pearly white eye that gives it its common name. So now that I've caught some of the Vireos and I studied them, the big trick was to map it on a Vireo family tree. So this has never been done before. So what I had to do was collect blood from the white-eyed Vireo. So in order to create that phylogenetic or that family tree I was telling you about a few slides ago with the A, B, C, D, you need the DNA of the animal you're working with. So in my case, I used blood. Now, thankfully, I didn't have to fly across all of the Americas to collect Vireo blood. Thankfully, scientists all over the world actually are doing this with other Vireo species, and there's like an online data bank, a gene bank, if you will, with all the DNA information for all the different Vireos in the Western Hemisphere. So the only one really missing, I mean, there's a few missing, but the main one that was missing was the Bermuda white-eyed Vireo. And when you have that DNA and you sequence it, this is how the computer represents the genetic information of an animal. So each species has a unique sequence of letters. So you can think of it as a barcode, right? And remember how I was telling you about sister species being more closely related to each other because they derive from a common ancestor? So in theory, two sister species, the genetic sequence should be very, very similar to each other compared to any other member in the family tree. So I was actually quite scared to do this because I had never done DNA sequencing before, and to be honest, I can't even say between you and me because I've got like, well, I don't know how many people are tuning in, but the point is, I was terrified because all my life I was taught that the Bermuda Vireo evolved from the North American white-eyed Vireo. But what if that wasn't true? Oh my god! Like, what if it was like related to like a blue-headed vireo or a Philadelphia vireo? Oh my god! Like, I was about to like test this. I don't know. I was about to like test why it was just accepted to be reality, right? But when I did plot it and I created the family tree with the vireo on it, there it is, right there, highlighted in red. The vireo species in Bermuda is indeed most closely related to the North American white-eyed vireo. So that supports the hypothesis that our birds in Bermuda indeed evolved from the North American white-eyed vireos. But look at those branch lengths, right? Look how short they are. Remember how I told you that if the branch lengths are very short or long, that just tells you like the duration of time has passed since they split? So the fact that I need like a magnifying glass to like see that branch length. So what that tells me is the Bermuda vireo very, very recently diverged from the North American white-eyed vireo, which another way you could think of it is the North American colonization. So the North American vireo basically colonized Bermuda very recently, maybe 1,000 years, couple thousand years. This bird has not been in Bermuda very long. But what's fascinating to me is that despite its relatively short stay in Bermuda, physically the bird has changed so much from its North American counterpart, which the legs have gone black. Why? The yellow in his face and his belly, it's faded. Why? Like I find that absolutely fascinating. So that goes to show how quickly evolution can occur when this bird is adapted to Bermuda's climate, its habitat. The changes can happen fairly quickly, but even though genetically the birds are almost still identical. So like I was saying earlier, as long as the Bermuda Virio still remains reproductively isolated from the North American population, this bird will continue to change and evolve into something even more unique than his North American counterparts. So if you look at like the species up top here, like Tirithyeus and Vireo, they have much longer branch lengths. So that's what I would expect to happen with the Bermuda Virio as long as they don't interbreed with the North American race. So that was the evolutionary relationships of my, more or less the evolutionary part of my PhD. Well, there was more, but that's all I'm covering in this talk. So the next thing I want to do is talk about the breeding behavior. So quick trivia for all the locals out there. Comment down below if you know where this is. I'll give you I'll give you a minute. I want you to comment below if you recognize where this is. Hopefully, there's some scholars who recognize this. Should I give you a hint? I mean, I don't know. I think it's pretty obvious, I guess. If you work in Hamilton, you probably drive this road like literally every day. Okay, so if you guessed Cedar Avenue, you're correct. That is indeed Cedar Avenue, and it was obviously called Cedar Avenue because of the trees that were lining the two sides of the road there. So that's the endemic Bermuda cedar. So that was once upon a time, that was the most dominant tree species in Bermuda. But unfortunately, because we introduced a lot of exotic plants all across the world, between 1946 and 1953, we imported this insect scale that once it arrived in Bermuda, it absolutely decimated all of the Bermuda cedars. So this picture here is not Cedar Avenue. This is actually taken on Nonsuch Island, where David spent most of his days doing a lot of conservation work. But the point is, I just want to show you like what the dead cedar skeletons look like after the scale insect decimated our cedars. So again, this goes back to this whole idea that now Bermuda is mostly like the woodlands of Bermuda is mostly comprised of this invasive exotic trees. And again, like I have so much admiration for this Vireo to survive all of that, right? Because the Vireo would have obviously evolved in that cedar forest, and here it is today, still breeding fairly well, adapting to this exotic trees here. So to study the breeding behavior of the Vireos, I still have my GPS, my field book, my binoculars, and I had to learn how to find their nests. So which was a challenge in some ways. But as I told you before, the way the Vireos move between the trees, they're literally just hopping a few inches, just jumping. And then, of course, they're so tame that they don't care that I'm behind them like 5 meters away. So they're like almost like, come on, let's go. The nest is over here. I'm like, okay, I'll follow you. And they usually just take me right to their nest. So that right there. That's a little clump of the early start of a Vireo nest. So whenever I found a Vireo nest, I would then proceed to sit anywhere from 5 meters to 10 meters back in a concealed spot. And I would just sit there for like half an hour, and just watch the Vireos work, watch them do what Vireos do and learn. And over time, I would visit every other day, and you see the nest being built up, gets thicker and thicker. And eventually, it just looks like this amazing basket, like an artist. I mean, they are artists, I suppose, in their own way, creating this beautiful pensile cup. So that's a classic white-eyed Vireo nest. They basically fasten it to the end of a forked branch for support. And the nest material is collected within the territory. Although Vireos are known, I have seen them they trespass into their neighbor's territory, steal leaves and plants and spider silk and bring it back to their nest to mate, which is hilarious. Oh, yeah. I hope this doesn't trigger anybody. But yeah, comment down below if you know what kind of spider this is, and let me know when was the last time you've seen it. Do you actually remember it at all? And yeah, and if you, of course, well, I'll just tell you in a nutshell. So that's basically a golden silk spider, and in my experience, I find that this species has absolutely declined. It's so scarce. When I was a child, I remember walking home from like Francis Patton, and I would be walking and I would see these spiders all up in the power lines and all the trees. Even at school, I would see them. And for one reason or another, I'm not sure why, their numbers have just absolutely plummeted. So again, if you remember seeing these spiders, let me know down below. Let me know the last time you saw one and where. But the reason I have this spider up, not to scare you, but the reason is because, according to David, the Virios used to actually take pieces of the spiders, the web, and include it in their nest. And I don't know if you guys remember, but this spider's web is extremely strong. Ironically, young Vireo fledglings actually get caught in the webbing of a silk spider, almost like how they get caught in my mist net. Like the durability of that web is insanely strong. But what I noticed when I was observing the Vireo during my PhD, a large percentage of the Vireo nests would actually just come undone, like a week into like incubation, almost like opening like a can, like when you open up a can, the lid comes up, the nest would just slowly unravel. And I hypothesized it might be because they no longer have this durable web to make their nests anymore. So when it comes to nest building, both the male and the female help build the nest together, and building takes usually about anywhere from 3 to 12 days. So it's a pretty big range of time that the birds use to complete the nest. So that's an image of a clutch of Vireo eggs right there. The clutch sizes tend to be anywhere from 2 to 4, but 3 is like the average. And the eggs are about the size of like a grape. So they're very, very small. And both the male and the female partake in sitting in the eggs and incubating them. And incubation takes about 2 weeks. And then once the 2-week period has passed, the eggs finally hatch. And hopefully you can see that it looks a little dark on my side, but hopefully you can see that okay. So those are some hatchling white-eyed vireos. So when they hatch, they're absolutely naked and they're blind. So you can imagine how vulnerable they are at this state. And because they don't have any feathers in their bodies, the parents spend a lot of time brooding them. They have to sit on them until their feathers start coming in so that they can thermoregulate for themselves. And the first set of feathers usually come in about day 4 or age 4. And both parents feed the nestlings very tirelessly. And as the birds get older, so does the food that they get fed. Like as well, the food gets larger as the vireos grow big. And that's what they look like just before they're ready to fledge or leave the nest on their own. And fledging only takes 9 to 12 days. Now, what's funny to me is 9 to 12 days is not a long time, right? 9 to 12 days, that's nothing. When I was doing my master's on the longtail, the incubation of a longtail was 42 days on average. So the entire incubation period was much longer than the nest building, the incubation, and the chick rearing of a vireo for comparison. But you'd be surprised what goes wrong in 9 to 12 days. The nest unravels and all the chicks fall out before they're ready to fly away. Predation is a big one. So I've seen vireo chicks being devoured to the bone by ants. I've seen rats moving about very close to the nest cup, and then the next time I go back, the nests are gone. The nestlings are gone. I've seen kiskadees attack vireos in the nest. It's pretty bad. 9 to 12 days, and I'm so naive because every time I find a nest, I'm like, yeah, they're gonna make it, and oh, it's so annoying when like it's like day 8. I'm like, all right, and then I come back and they're just gone. And it's just so heartbreaking and it's just so annoying. Like it's amazing, like I said, what goes wrong, but it's us, it's our fault. We brought all these introduced predators here, and now this bird is like has to contend with all this. But the good news is they do have multiple nest attempts. So when a vireo nest fails, they do rebuild and relay. And I've seen them relay as up to about 5 times. So I think that's what keeps them. That's why they're still here. The fact that they try again so many times, despite being, all the nest failures that happen. Vireos are territorial. So now that photograph was taken in Bermuda. The Don't Take My Spot. So for those of you who aren't from Bermuda and don't know, Bermuda is very. We have Bermuda Day, and essentially there's this big parade that goes to the Capitol. So I think that sidewalk is actually from Cedar Avenue, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, what Bermudians like to do is to claim the best spot on the sidewalk so they can get the best views of the parade. People will go the day before or even the week before and actually tape out parts of the sidewalk with their name or "Don't take my spot." And so that way the family members can actually set up their tent come the parade day. And I always find it hilarious because, I mean, some of these families have been doing this for generations. I know mine, we always had the same spot for at least like a decade, easy. And what I find hilarious is we're very similar to Virios in this way. I think Bermuda Virios, no bird in Bermuda, in my honest opinion, doesn't encapsulate Bermudian culture and personality than the Virios themselves. The only difference is Virios are territorial year round, whereas we're only like this around Bermuda Day. So males basically own the territories. That's how I like to think of it. So basically, what I found through color-banded birds is that year after year, when I revisit the same patch of woods, it's the same male year after year after year. The only thing that can change is the female. So sometimes the male and the female will stay together for like several years. Sometimes they break up within the same breeding season. But whatever the case, it's usually always the male defending that same territory. And I think the way I think of it is that the female is only associated with that territory because of her relationship with the male. Males are known to trespass and sneak into neighbors' territories. So the Virios are using their song to defend their territories year round. So when a Vireo is trespassing into his neighbor's territory, he won't sing. He will sneak. He will quietly fly over, and he knows they're so intelligent. They know the boundaries of their territory, so they know when they go into another bird's territory, they need to shut up because if they don't, if they start singing and make noise, the owner of that territory will fight, beat them up, and then they probably have to retreat in shame. But on the flip side of that, I have literally watched a male Vireo steal and take over his neighbor's territory right before my very eyes, and I knew it was happening. So I found this male at Spittle Pond, and I mapped this territory with my GPS because the birds are color banded. So I just followed them around, take points. And I said to myself, "My gosh, this territory is nothing. It's small." And it's almost like the male heard me and said, "Yeah, you're right, Miguel." So all of a sudden, this male flew like the next week. This male flew into his neighbor's territory, and he just started singing. He just kept singing, and he wouldn't leave. So the owner of that territory kept trying to drive the male out, and the intruder just flew to a different branch in that territory, just kept singing. And then when I came back the following day, that original owner was nowhere to be found, and that intruding male, successfully absorbed his neighbor's territory. So he just doubled his territory in size. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess you're going to be okay now. Now you have space to rear your chicks. So I thought it was funny. So this is just a diagram, a little map showing how the Vireo territories are situated amongst each other. And you can see they're pretty well defined. There's a little bit of overlap in some of them, but overall, the polygons represent particular males. So this is like a male with like a red band. This is a male with a green band. This is one with the blue one. So the polygons represent the territories of a specific male. And again, you can see how well defined they are, which is pretty cool. So that was the breeding biology. So my next task was to look at the vocal behavior of the Bermuda Virio. So as I said to you before, this bird's name, the colloquial name for them is the chick of the village. And they get their name from their song. Because apparently some people think the bird is saying chick of the village when it sings. And I finally got it. For a while, I'm like, I don't hear it. But finally, I heard it once. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So only the male sings this chick of the village song. It's just the males, not the females. And as I said to you a few slides ago, song is very important for territory defense. So when a bird is singing, to us, it sounds like they're saying like, oh, it's such a beautiful song, music to my ears. But what the bird is actually saying is, this is my territory. I'm still alive. The space is occupied. You come in here, we're going to have a problem. I will kill you if you come in this territory. That's basically what they're saying year round. So, and there's a lot of cool experiments where they've removed birds from their territories. And sure enough, the second they remove them and the songs are not there, the neighbors can hear and say, wait a minute, I don't hear this bird singing anymore. Let me go see what's up. And they proceed to take over the territory because they no longer hear the male singing. So that's why Virios are singing year round to let others know, I'm still here. I survived the night. This space is occupied. Don't even worry with it. And song is also very, very important for mate attraction as well. So in the spring, even now, actually, I'm noticing the Virios are singing even more than usual. They do sing year round, but usually in the breeding season, the summer, so like February, March, April, they usually start singing, almost doubling their rate. So males also use song to advertise their availability to females. And I found recently in one of my papers that males who are single spend much more time singing. than males who are busy with the partner and building a nest. They sing significantly less. So song is basically, it's a dual functionality. Song is important for territory defense, letting listeners know I'm here, this space is occupied, and the amount of songs that the bird sings is also important for their pair status. So again, if they're in a relationship or they're they have a mate, they don't need to sing as much. But if a male is single, doesn't have a female, he needs to advertise to potential partners like, "Hey, I'm single. Who wants to be with me?" kind of thing. And it's just like with people. It's so funny. I've seen Virios that have been single for an entire breeding season, and I've seen other males pick up a new female within a week after losing the original one. So it's all variable. It's just like humans. Everyone's different in the speed they take to acquire a mate. And I found that based on my exhaustive recordings of recording the same males over and over and over, I estimate that the repertoire size of a Bermuda Virio is about 6 to 10 songs. So when you hear a song, you can think of it as like a sentence, basically. So I've got here, so this is right here is a spectrogram. So this is a visual representation of what the Vireo songs sound like. So I'm gonna give people a quick minute to just adjust their volume accordingly, because especially if you have headphones, the Vireo songs can be quite loud, and I don't want to damage anyone's eardrums. So I'm just gonna give people like 10 seconds just to adjust their volume, just so it's not like ridiculously loud. If you don't have headphones in, you should be fine. But if you have headphones in, I'm just worried about your eardrums. So I'm gonna play a song in about 5 seconds. I learned that the hard way. I had tinnitus once for a few days after playing one of these songs on Max. So anyway, I'm gonna play a song, and the way basically I'm gonna play the song, then I'm gonna shut up for a little bit. But basically, let me know down below if you've heard the song before. Does it sound familiar? Have you never heard it? But basically, the way the Virios will sing. So again, I told you there's songs that kind of like sentences, right? So the way the Vireo has, so they have a singing style. So what they do is they repeat the same song or sentence repeatedly, and then eventually they switch. So for example, if I was a Vireo speaking English, I would say, "I like cats." I like cats. I will say that anywhere from 10 to maybe even 100 times. And eventually I will say, however, dogs are pretty awesome too. However, dogs are pretty awesome too. So we call that in ornithology, we call that eventual variety. So it's basically a singing pattern where birds sing one song for a set amount of time, eventually switching to another song in their repertoire. All right, so let me just play the song. It's going to be 5 seconds of silence, then you hear the song. Okay, that was one. So I'll let it play for a bit. So comment down below if you ever heard this song before. Now, let me know when you notice the song has changed. Comment down below. Let me know the moment the song has changed. When has this male changed his singing pattern? So again, this is what a video does. They sing all day, producing these vocalizations to defend their territories and attract a mate. Now, there's another vocalization that most people probably aren't familiar with. So just like people, just like people, Virios get very upset about something. And I call this scolding behavior. When they're really pissed off, like it could be an intruder in the territory. So maybe there's a predator too close to the nest. It could be me getting too close to them. Bird watchers, we have this thing where we imitate this alarm call that some passerines do to get birds to come close. So it's like a is a noise that we make. It basically tricks birds and makes them come closer to us to investigate. But we only do it to bring the birds closer so we can see them. But this also, that pitching noise I just did also triggers this scolding behavior. So when you hear this, this is basically a Vireo that's absolutely furious and it wants to attack whatever's in sight. And what I found is, actually, I'll let it play for us and I'll explain. Yeah, so that's a scolding call. So at the end of the talk, if you guys want to hear these again, you just ask me. Hopefully you heard it okay. So when the bird's really agitated, that's the sound that it makes. And what's fascinating is it's almost like when the issue is really like when it's like a very strong threat or when the bird is really mad, they do it in rapid succession. It's like but if it's like a semi-threat, a lukewarm, the bird may just go, it may scold much slowly. So it may go so you're just like, you're like more of an annoyance. But if it's like a, oh my God, they're like eating my babies, it's gonna be scolding much, much faster. Okay, so basically, so that was pretty much the goals of my PhD. So I investigated the evolutionary relationships of the Bermuda Virio. So yes, they are indeed related to the North American Vireo. For the first time, I dove into their breeding biology by just basically stalking them in the trees. And then I studied their vocal behavior. So understanding what are the contexts that these birds use these vocalizations. Okay, it's important for territory defense, mate attraction, um, signaling that a threat is nearby. Awesome. So I wanted to basically end the Wide-Eyed Vireo section with a passage that I found in this old book written by a British ornithologist named Savile Reed, and the book is hilarious. He basically depicts his adventures in Bermuda, and in those days they used to shoot birds with with guns. But so I flipped through his book, and he has a small passage where he dedicates just to the Bermuda Vireo. So I'm going to show you a passage and I'm just going to read, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'm just going to pull a few sentences from that passage. So here we go. So he's got here, oh, keep in mind, this was written 1874 to 1875, so quite some time ago. So he's got here the white-eyed vireo, the smallest and one of the commonest resident birds in Bermuda, familiar to all through its sprightly ways, loud song, and astounding impudence. It is termed locally chick of the village or chick-chu williu from its note. This is, however, very variable, and hardly any two birds give the same rendering. One particular variety is gingerbeer quick, a call very much adapted to the climate of Bermuda. I have found it usually from 3 feet to 12 feet above ground in the cedars, mangroves, Bermuda holly, pomegranate, and lemon trees, but most commonly in the cedars. I have never met one with more than 3 eggs or young in a nest. It's a shame that Savile and I never met because he'd be shocked to know that I have found multiple nests with 4 eggs, but I digress. um, let's see here. I have touched one with my gun in the thick bushes before it would budge an inch. And when one is in the hunt for rarities among the big cedars, the little wretches will come from all parts to irritate and deceive one, playing all sorts of antics from all parts. From all parts to irritate and deceive one, playing all sorts of antics on the topmost branches, apparently imitating the movements of migrant warblers, in order to induce one to waste a charge on them. Several times they have succeeded with me, and on one occasion, the bird having lodged at the very top of a very ugly-looking tree, I tore my hands and clothes in pieces in anxiety to secure the supposed prize. But in spite of this, I have great regard for the cheerful, restless little fellows whose presence does so much to relieve the monotony of the everlasting cedars. So so you can see in Reed's time, the norm was to actually shoot birds and to collect them, and the idea of that was to because there were no cameras back then, right? So in order to prove that a bird record existed in a locality, that was the way to do it. You would shoot the bird, skin it, prepare it as a museum specimen, and ship it off to some experts away. Or some naturalists actually just kept the birds in like their own little stuffed bird collection, if you will. And this is how the very first field guides would have been created, right? They would have shot the birds, examined them in the hand, and then by then you could draw exactly what you're seeing. But today, we obviously have put down the guns, picked up the lens, and we now instead prefer to shoot birds with cameras instead of like shooting them and removing them permanently from the population. So basically, I'm just going to end the talk with a few pictures of birds that I've taken since picking up photography. And I actually started in October. So I mean, I've been birding since 2011, and I had like zero interest in photography until of last year, after basically in the midst of the pandemic. So I have several friends and birding companions that I have to thank for that. You know, Luke Foster from Work Academy, Neil Morris, Andrea Webb, Herb Marshall. All of these are local birders who've inspired me to get into bird photography. So here's a couple that I want to show you. So again, these are all pictures that I've taken in Bermuda. So this right here, this is a yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a kind of woodpecker that's found throughout most of Canada. And so yeah, we still do get woodpeckers in Bermuda, and they have a habit of clinging to trees just like this. The tail of a woodpecker is extremely stiff, so it actually allows the bird to it uses it like almost like a rudder. So when the bird is like leaping up, propelling itself, it basically uses the tail to propel itself upwards on the trunk. And so the picture I've got here to the right, these are the holes that the yellow-bellied sapsucker leave when they're feeding on a tree. This is actually the bark of a casuarina tree, or an Australian whistling pine. This is the tree that was introduced to Bermuda to replace the cedars, because they're very fast-growing trees, quite salt tolerant. But the sapsuckers have a very distinctive feeding style. So they basically leave these neat horizontal row of holes. And what they're doing is they put the holes in the tree, and eventually those holes will start weeping out sap. And the sapsucker will proceed to lap the sap that comes out of it. So comment down below if you've ever seen this on the trees. I actually photographed this one, I'm pretty sure at, I think it's the Arboretum. I'm pretty sure I photographed this one at the Arboretum. And like those holes. So if you have a backyard, so sapsuckers love green space, open green space with sparse trees. So they love casuarinas, coconut palms, Chinese fan palms. So if you have a lawn with like sparse trees, go outside and have a look at the tree trunks and let me know if you see any holes on them, because it's possible that your backyard could be a favorite spot for the sapsuckers to hang out. And I have a hunch that despite the fact that 95% of Bermuda's trees are introduced and invasive, I find it still interesting that the sapsucker specifically attacks introduced tree species. Even though there are native species right next to them, consistently I find that sapsuckers appear to favor introduced trees over the native ones. And it makes me think, well, I wonder, since we've introduced all these trees, have we actually made Bermuda a more favorable wintering habitat for the yellow-bellied sapsucker? Another bird I photographed this one, I think, Boxing Day, just after Christmas last year, the peregrine falcon. This bird is a bird of prey. It's a large falcon, pretty much found in every landmass across the world, except, I guess, Antarctica. They do these spectacular dives. They basically hunt their prey from the sky. And they're known to like terrorize like pigeons and ducks. And when they do this spectacular dive, when they're going after their prey, so they basically fly down at a speed of about 250 to 275 miles per hour. And during that spectacular dive, that bird is the fastest animal on the planet, only during that dive. And basically it collides with its prey midair, it clutches its feet and it just collides with it. And it wins the bird. And once the bird is incapacitated, it proceeds to basically nibble at the bird's neck, sever its spinal cord, and effectively kill the bird, and then it just proceeds to eat it. So these birds do winter in Bermuda. You can often see them hovering over like the city of Hamilton, golf courses where the ducks like to hang out around ponds. So if you want to find a peregrine falcon in Bermuda, your best bet is like in the winter, and just look up. And every now and again, you'll just see a flock of pigeons like acting very erratic and terrified. And sure enough, there's usually a falcon around who's got their eye on one of them. We have the black and white warbler. So this is the kind of bird that Savile Reed was trying to shoot in the cedars. So this is a very small bird, a little bit bigger than a vireo. And just like the sapsucker that I showed you, this black and white warbler also likes to cling onto trees, and it walks up the bark basically. But instead of going after sap, what the bird does, it peels away the bark of the tree and gleans the insects from the bark, or may glean insects among the foliage or in the leaves. So it's a very striking bird. Again, all in Bermuda. It's a small bird, but once you get your eyes on them, they're very remarkable to look at. So I photographed this bird in the Arboretum, as well as this beauty here, the Prairie Warbler, another species that Saville was no doubt trying to shoot as well. Again, another North American passerine. So these birds come through in Bermuda in the fall. So their peak arrival is about October. September, October is like their peak. And they spend all winter in Bermuda. And then in March, April the following year, that's when they start to depart to go back up north to their northern breeding grounds in North America. So again, this was another bird I found in the Arboretum. I got here the ringneck duck. I put this bird in here because this was literally the bird that got me into bird watching. I saw this duck with David at a golf course pond in Tuckerstown, and I absolutely fell in love. I thought I mean, it was like one of the most, at the time, it was like the most beautiful bird I'd ever seen. So yeah, golf courses in Bermuda are actually very good hotspots to see migrant birds. And well, the reason is because you got the ponds. So obviously ducks like bodies of water to feed in. And as long as the golf course doesn't use things like insecticides, that promotes, without insecticides, all sorts of caterpillars and other insects can thrive in the lawn, and that supports other migrant birds as well. And another bird right here, American Widget, another beautiful duck that I photographed at you guessed it, a golf course. Gorgeous, gorgeous bird, American Widgeon. Here's a lesser blackback gull. So this is by far the most abundant wintering species of seagull that spend the winter in Bermuda. So you can find them lazily flying around in bays, harbors, beaches, probably harassing you at times at coastal restaurants, trying to steal your French fries. Um, and yeah, what's fascinating to me is this is actually a European species, but yet despite that, it's the most abundant wintering species of gull that come to Bermuda every winter. Whereas about in the 80s and earlier, they were actually an extremely rare sighting in Bermuda. So I don't know if North America now has a breeding population of lesser blackback gulls now that I don't know about, but they are definitely become our most common wintering gull. The brown pelican. So this bird, if you guys, so again, comment down below if you've seen any of these in Bermuda. Let me know, or if not, if you got viewers overseas, just let me know. Oh yeah, we have that where I live. So this is a brown pelican. So about 3 weeks ago, I don't know if you remember, but we had a very vicious gale come through right from the southwest, and the next day, someone spotted a brown pelican off of Darrow's Wharf. So if you were at Darrow's Wharf about 3 weeks ago, you would have had a treat. Seeing this brown pelican just like plunge dive about 50 feet off the dock. It was incredible to watch. And lastly, the next day, literally at the same dock, this bird turned up, the magnificent frigate bird. So this was found by my good friend Luke Foster from Work Academy. So this sinister-looking bird has a wingspan of about 7.5 feet. So it was blown in from the Caribbean from that very same gale that brought the pelican over. And this bird has a very insidious hunting strategy. All it does, it just soars around all day looking at other seabirds that carry fish, and it will proceed to steal that fish for itself or for its young. So if this bird bred in Bermuda, it would attack all the longtails and take the food from it. So, and again, this bird was seen in Bermuda, just about 3 weeks ago. So yeah, so basically, I hope that gave you a sense of bird life in Bermuda and what's there for you to see. So basically, in closing, I just want to say, keep your eyes and ears open as well as your mind. Let the past inspire you. So unfortunately, the way birds are going today, birds are significantly declining. So in North America alone, about since like the 80s, about 3 billion birds have just disappeared. They've died. And in the same time span in Europe, about 600 million birds have just disappeared. So birds are on the decline. And, so I think we as humans really need to like step it up and do our part in protecting the habitats and enforcing more legislations to protect species all across the globe. Because it's not just a Bermuda issue. Bermuda is just like a life raft for these migrant birds. So yes, we could do things in Bermuda that will help, and we should, because a lot of birds, as you probably learned today, a lot of birds from overseas use Bermuda and rely on Bermuda and its habitats to survive the winter. But it also depends on what people do elsewhere in the Caribbean, in the States, in Canada, etc. And lastly, just never stop exploring and never stop learning. And yeah, and that concludes my talk for the evening.
Thank you so much, Miguel. That was so interesting. And I have to say, your passion is infectious. I want to get my binoculars out and go out right now, but it's dark.
Yeah, no worries.
So you have lots of support on the call and a lot of proud educators, that have seen you on your journey, and really excited to see how far you've come and that
Thank
you're
you.
following your passion. So actually, Dr. Tracy Harney is on the call. She has all of her students from 1121 listening in. There's people from the
Nice.
UK. There's people from the
Nice.
States, I believe.
UK. Wow.
Yeah. So lots of support here. Like I said, very proud of you. And but we'll take some questions. So there's one already. Actually, it was a question I had, and you kind of touched on it, but we were hoping you might expand on it a little bit.
Sure.
So you mentioned about that, as they kind of diverge from the North American species, that some of their characteristics, become different in
Right.
Bermuda, and the color of the feathers seem to be duller here.
Yeah, that's right.
So the question from Giselle Muhammad was, basically, is it because of the environment here that is causing it to be less colorful? Does that take a play or have a part in it?
Yeah, that's one of my that's pretty much one fact that likely explains it. I remember reading a paper about they looked at a correlation between the rainfall in a particular locality and the plumage of a bird. And if I remember correctly, the higher the rainfall, the brighter the birds are, which I
Mm,
find fascinating. So I don't know if that has to do with the rain somehow maybe increasing the availability and food for the birds to eat. But climatic factors definitely play a role in Bermuda's or just birds' evolution in general. So we're subtropical, so we do have we have a distinctive dry period and a wet period. So we're not like raining year round. So it's possible that Bermuda's subtropical climate has caused the plumage of the bird to be not as bright as, say, other birds further up north, where it's constantly like raining a lot or the snow and things like that. So I'm pretty sure the climate definitely plays a role in that. I find what most mind-boggling is the legs being black. I mean,
mm,
hopefully years from now I could get back to you on that. But yeah, it's astounding how quickly this bird has changed physically, despite its short stay in Bermuda compared to its genetics, which are like almost identical. So the
yeah.
physical traits have changed much faster than the genetic components of the bird, apparently.
Yeah. So maybe it's because in North America where, like, say, it rains a lot or there's snow, they had to be more colorful to stand out and get noticed by those female chicks that are looking
Yeah.
looking out for them. And maybe life is just easy here on the island, so they don't have to work as hard. I don't know. Is that maybe a factor?
Yeah, very well could be. I mean, so our population isn't migratory,
Mm,
so they don't have to risk their lives leaving Bermuda to go Florida. I mean, or like, well, rather the Caribbean. So the birds have they have a much higher survival rate, that's for sure. So both males and females. So a fairly stable population. So yeah, that could be it as well. They don't have to work hard to attract a mate, you know. So yeah, it's very puzzling as what caused this diversity that we're seeing.
so maybe that'll be your postdoc topic.
Yeah.
So I think you've inspired a few new. Do you call them twitchers? What do you call it? Tweeters? Twitchers.
Oh, Twitchers. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Twitchers, sorry.
yeah.
So
Twitchers. Yeah, yeah.
Anthony Buckley wants to know, where can I go see a white-eyed vireo?
Literally any hedge you could think of. Literally any woodland in Bermuda would do. I've noticed there's one place in Bermuda that does like virtually no Vireos, and that's actually in the city of Hamilton, like the actual city. Because there's barely any trees in the middle. So even like Bernard's Park, Victoria Park, not a single Vireo, which makes sense because surrounded by all the cars and the noise and there's no way a Vireo can attract a mate in the middle of the city of Hamilton. But on the outskirts of the city and beyond, you start to see the Vireos again. So up by Bernard's Park, for example, TCD, like you could hear the Vireos singing in those trees, Pembroke Dump and beyond. So literally besides the city of Hamilton, you just stick your head in a hedge, you're gonna find one. I mean, they're literally everywhere, and that's what made them an amazing PhD test subject. The fact that they were abundant, they're tame, um, yeah, I mean, I couldn't have picked a better bird to study for a PhD because they were just everywhere and they were just very tolerant of me being around, watching them creepily with binoculars, like 5 meters away. So yeah.
So they're protected, but are they not endangered? Or what's their status since they're
Yeah, good
protected?
question.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. So I think a lot of people think I'm not saying you in particular, I'm just speaking out
Mm,
loud.
mm,
I think there's this notion that, a species is only important if it's like on the decline and things like that. In Bermuda's case, it's kind of weird because like the bird is still very abundant, but I suppose if we had to think of like, well, why is it important in terms of its abundance or whatever? It's literally the last endemic land bird for Bermuda. So for us locally, it's important because
mhm.
if that Vireo goes out, then that's it. There's no more endemic land birds uh, for Bermuda. So in that respect, it's very, very important. So numbers wise, the population is great. It's very stable. They seem to be doing very well despite all the hiccups. And we learned through banding these adult birds that they have a fairly long lifespan. So I saw a male the other day. That sounds kind of funny. I saw him. He's about I saw him just yesterday, and he was banded like in 2015. So I was like, what, like 6 years? So, and he's in the same territory, the exact same one, still alive and kicking. He's had
Wow.
several females since then, but he's got the same house, if you will.
Well,
So,
actually,
yeah.
you just segued into the next question. So, how many mates would he potentially have over his lifespan?
Ooh, I better answer this very carefully. So, what I've observed, I've seen males have as many as three different females before. But what happens is, from what I can tell, the female appears to be the one. And again, I'm still like fleshing this out, but from what I can tell, okay, the male owns the territory, so it's his job to attract the female to his home. So once they're together, they raise a chick or they try to nest. But then if they have several like failures, like nest attempts, it's always the female that just appears to disappear, and it's the same male in the same territory, and he goes back to trying to attract a new female. So I've seen one female in one season switch between three different males, like neighboring males within the same territory. So it's basically like a rotating door. So like a female's like, okay, I'm gonna go with this male. Oh, it didn't work out. He's useless. He can't build a nest. Literally, there's some Vireo males that are terrible. Like individual males that I know suck at building a nest. So then he'll leave. She'll leave him, go to his neighbor. They're together for a bit. Oh, you got too many rats in your territory. We keep getting predated on. I'm leaving you, and I'm gonna join this. I'm gonna pair up with this female. This male instead. So basically, the female appears to be the one that goes through the different territories, pairing up with the male. Whereas it's the male's job to attract the female, keep her there, and if they break up, he has to stay put, attract a new one, and the female's free just to move around, kind of thing. But when they're paired, they are loyal to each other, from what I can tell. To confirm that, you would probably have to do some sort of genetics on the chicks, because in some birds they're very promiscuous. So if you were to take DNA from each of the chicks, you'd find the paternity is different. But I'm pretty sure that from what I've read, male Vireos, white-eyed Vireos are very loyal to each other. So once they're paired, they're loyal to each other. But once they divorce, it's free. The females are, yeah, next one, kind of thing.
I was fascinated by your story of the cheeky male that took over his neighboring territory, and I
I
was
felt
wondering,
terrible.
but did you observe, was he bigger and better? Was his song better? Was the other one sick? Like, what did you
He
observe?
It was mortifying because I was just trying to figure out what males I was going to study for this particular study I was doing. And then the second I realized this bird was about to lose his territory, I looked at my dad. I said, "We need to ban another Vireo right now," because I knew the next day that male was going to be gone. Um, yeah, he was just stubborn. The trespassing male just did not leave. I mean, to me, they looked identical. Neighboring males do have the same. They do share some of the same songs in their repertoires, but I don't know specifically what it was about that male that just didn't leave. So that would be the equivalent of me. Pretend we didn't have like police. That would be like the equivalent of me coming into your house, just sitting in your sofa, and like, yeah, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. And then eventually the owner's like, fine, we're gonna leave because this weird Miguel guy isn't leaving our house. So that's what was happening. He just didn't leave. He just kept singing like he literally owned the place. And guess what? And a week later, he owned
He
the
did.
place.
It's amazing. Yeah, I have a few questions here coming in. This looks like somebody you might know. Nico, me,
Oh, it's my brother.
your
Hey,
brother.
what's up,
I know
bro?
I can't get your last name right out
Way
of my
past
mouth.
your bedtime in the UK. Oh, you're the UK advisor. Okay.
Mejias. So, looking at the Atlantic flight pattern, how long does the Vireo need to stay in Bermuda to recharge so that they can continue to South America?
Hey, good question, bro. Yeah, so some birds, when they come to Bermuda, they may spend like a week refueling. So when we capture these birds, we have something called like a fat score. So you catch a bird like in a mist net, you take the bird out of the net, you hold it, and you can actually blow in the bird's feathers to see the skin. So the birds actually store their fat. It looks all yellow on their skin. So that's how you can tell that a bird has a lot of fat reserves. But if you blow in the bird's skin, the feathers, and there's like no yellow, that bird has a zero fat score. It has virtually nothing on it. It's skin and bones. So birds can pick up a lot of fat from the food they eat very, very rapidly. So I've seen some birds stay for about a week and then they're off on their way. But there are some birds actually, they may fall out of their migration, stay in Bermuda, and they actually may end up spending the entire winter as well. So there are some birds that are like, no, I need to get to South America. And that could be, like I said, as fast as a week. And there are others that may stay and like, you know what, I'm going to stay for the entire winter. So yeah, it's pretty quickly that they can accumulate that.
Interesting. There's you might be able to understand this question better than I, but from the Nutty Otter, you mentioned that the songs the Bermuda White-eyed Vireo sing differently compared to the rest. Would this be what you call a meme by Richard Dawkins' definition, the ecological biologist, the British one?
Oh
I don't.
man, I I don't know. Oh, I feel terrible. I don't know the reference. Oh dear, maybe I'm getting too old. I don't
I
know.
know, I know. I'm like a meme.
I'll see it. Well, I know the meme. Yeah, I know the meme is. I'm
No,
trying
I
to
know. I'm
find
just
like
joking.
the
Maybe if Nutty Otter's still there, maybe they can explain their or expand on their
meme.
question because I'm curious too what they mean
Mention
by
song
this.
is different compared
What
to
they
the
mean by
rest.
the meme.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's funny. Um, how do I explain that? I guess the best way I could think of it is I don't know how's the best way I could think of it. Yeah, it's like it. So basically, no single. Okay, imagine a music artist, right? You got Michael Jackson, you got Prince. So actually, that's a terrible example because none of them shit. Okay, think of like a cover band. There we go. So you've got Linkin Park, and then you got a bunch of people who like to cover Linkin Park music, but they may cover other things. If that makes sense. So some videos share some neighbors. They do share some of the same songs in their repertoire, but no single male has all the exact same songs in their repertoire. So the way the Virios learn their songs is a combination of three ways. One, when they're nestlings, they hear their father calling when they bring food to them, so they hear it that way. Number two, when the bird is mature, when that bird grows up and disperses and finds his own territory, it learns the songs of his neighbors. And the third factor is the bird itself creates its own song. So those are the three sources of variation within a Vireo's repertoire. So that's why no single Vireo has the same repertoire, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does.
Okay,
Oh,
so
shout out
go.
to Tristan Hennig in Alberta. I'm actually drinking out of my white-eyed Vireo mug. So yeah, thanks, Tristan. I appreciate it.
New question coming in from a former lecturer of yours, Onisha Simmons. Miguel,
How are you?
what advice can you give students interested in studying speciation in Bermuda, as islands are hotspots for such occurrences?
Ooh, what advice? It's a good question. Well, I mean, my curiosity certainly began by just simply going outdoors and exploring. I think it's a bit harder nowadays. I don't want to sound like a, like an older individual with, can't walk and there's technology nowadays. But I think just simply going out there and exploring because I know like there's a lot of distractions with cell phones and TVs and things like that. So literally, I would say start by just going outside your house and go to like one of our nature reserves and just start like taking note of what's around you, the birds, the insects. Take pictures of everything you see, anything that looks different. Or, oh, I've never noticed this plant before. What is that? Take a picture. Um, there are certain websites that I know of where you can actually log in some of your records. So there's a site that would be really great for biology students. It's called iNaturalist. It's almost
Mhm.
like a Facebook but for naturalists. That's literally what it is. And you take a picture of something and you upload it onto iNaturalist, and it will give you an ID. You're like, oh, okay, this is a Bermuda palmetto. Here's some information about it, and here are all the records. So things like that. So I think getting involved in things like iNaturalist would be a big help. So just go outside, and you don't even need like a crazy camera. You can literally use like a cell phone, take a
Mm.
picture of it, make an account. It's free, and upload the picture onto your onto iNaturalist, and it could tell you like what you're looking at. And yeah, it's pretty accurate. So yeah, that would be my best advice. Explore your surroundings, take pictures, and use apps like iNaturalist. Or if you have Facebook or Instagram, share your pictures of like your plants, your bees, your whatever you're seeing out there, and just post it on Facebook. And you never know who's gonna reply to your Facebook post. And like, oh yeah, I know what that is, or I don't know what that is. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I just posted on the bottom of the or in the chat, iNaturalist is the app. Like you
Oh,
say, you,
nice.
you just put it on your phone. I had it on my phone for a bit there. Sometimes it can be a little off on the
Yeah.
identification, but for the most part, it's pretty good. Um, yes, I had another question coming in. Oh, Nutty Otter got back to us about,
Okay.
yeah, so a meme is a unite of cultural information spread by imitation. Sorry, should have elaborated more. I was limited by word count on YouTube. Okay, so
Oh,
hopefully
nice.
he answered your question.
Yeah, I hope I
Um,
got it.
I think you did. Bro is back to asking some more questions over in the UK. He hasn't gone to bed yet. Prior to any storms, weather, winter gales, or hurricanes, do you find the behavior of the Vireo changes?
Good question. They have a very high survival in storms. I remember distinctly there was this bird with an orange band banded at Fairy Reach, and he was the first color banded vireo I'd ever seen in the wild in Bermuda. And I remember when Hurricane Nicole in 2016 hit, I was actually worried for that particular bird. I was like, "Ooh, I hope he's okay." And I remember after the storm, I drove to Fairy Reach and I checked on his territory. His territory was in absolute shambles. All my trails were gone, but sure enough, he was still there, jumping about amongst the fallen debris, and he survived it all. He was well. He actually scolded me, so I think he was just upset that his territory was wrecked, and he just did not want to deal with me at the time, I suppose. But from what I can tell, the birds, how their behavior changes if the hurricane is so bad that it strips all the berries away, the vireos get kind of desperate for food, so they will start attacking like really big lizards. So I remember David Wingate told me a story where he was walking to his car and he saw this like thing rolling on the ground, and when he put his binoculars up to it, it was a vireo wrestling with a lizard on the ground. They were both tumbling in his driveway, and a vireo is trying to like murder this lizard that's like as long as him, and that's something you would never really see um, when there's plenty of other food options for it to take. So that's a distinctive example I could think of like odd behavior. Like I've seen vireos kill much smaller lizards when they're like feeding their young, but to see a vireo take on a lizard about the same length of it is pretty impressive. So yeah, that's probably one example I could think of.
I had a question for you. So you were saying that the population is quite stable, but say, there's obviously lots of anthropogenic influences, habitat
Right.
loss, pollution, all these types of things, invasives. So if we were to get rid of the white-eyed vireo, what kind
Right.
of gap in the ecosystem would it leave?
Very good question. So a bird like a vireo would spread. It would be a main spreader of seeds. So in a perfect world, if the forest was still native, the vireo would be one of the main spreaders of like Bermuda cedar, Bermuda olive wood, southern hackberry, trees like that. But ironically, now that we're mostly invasive trees, the vireo is actually probably spreading invasive seeds because that's all there is to eat.
Hmm.
So that's probably one of its primary roles in terms of just like dispersing seeds across like the landscape. That's probably like the most significant thing I could think of. But I guess the way I look at it, I think of it more of like a cultural symbol, I suppose, because I feel like if all the other endemics that I listed in my presentation were still here, the Bermuda Virio might not seem as important. It would just be like, oh, just another endemic. But I guess the way I look at it from a cultural perspective, it's like, man, if this bird is gone and that's it, all we're left with is these introduced like bird species like the house sparrow, the kiskadee, the
Mm.
starling, the cardinal is even introduced. So I guess I look at it so yeah, I guess I look at it more so as a cultural icon as opposed to like a significant contributor to the environment itself. Even longtails. I mean, Bermuda in theory would do just fine without any longtails, but I think a lot of people, locals and tourists alike, can appreciate longtails, and some people actually come here because they love seeing the longtails in the summer.
Mm.
So I think it's kind of like the same kind of thing where it's just like this cultural value that we have to these species, not so much a significant environmental role that they do, but from what I understand of them, probably just dispersing seeds is like their main contributor, I
And
believe.
they seem to be keeping the animals under check too,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
as they wrestle them.
yeah, wrestling.
But like you say, like cultural importance is really, huge, and they embody us Bermudians. They seem to have similar characteristics as you say, and their loss would be greatly missed. So it's really important to conserve them.
Yeah, definitely, no
And,
doubt.
and you just don't know, like if they were gone, what might unravel. We don't
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
exactly. I hope I
So
never live to see it, but yeah, you're
yeah,
right. Who knows?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we have a few minutes left to take a few last questions. If anyone in the audience has any burning questions, I'm just flicking through. I don't see any yet. Lots of really interesting talk, Miguel. People very proud of you. These are all the comments coming through. But I think I've covered all of the questions.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So Yeah, so I guess we can wrap up. Dr. Green, I'll just put a comment up from her. She's our president at Bermuda College. Very interesting presentation. And like I said, the same thing. Your passion and enthusiasm is infectious.
I
If it
appreciate it.
wasn't
Thank you.
if it wasn't dark, I'd be out with my binoculars right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you so much, Miguel. That was really engaging and interesting, which is echoed by many comments. Mary Alexander, great talk, Miguel. Your delivery is both informative and entertaining. Oh,
Glad I could be funny.
yeah, we all learned a lot, definitely. So I think you've inspired lots of new twitchers.
Twitchers, yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Twitchers.
yeah.
So yeah, so hopefully we'll see more people out enjoying our Bermuda environment and looking for birds and other organisms alike. Um, so thank you for being our 2022 Roche Science Public Forum guest speaker. Just to close up, I do have to do a few thank yous. And of course, our first thank you is to Roche International, who are our sponsors. They were the ones who donated money to us in the 1990s, and since which we've been able to keep our labs, you know, uh, uh, up to date and filled with all kinds of interesting equipment. Hopefully that keeps students engaged. We have new virtual reality stuff now that's really cool. Miguel, you would have loved that. Um, and yeah, and they also obviously help to support students through scholarship, and we have two actual Roche scholars this year who are going to go on to become nurses, and they are Tisha Trott, sorry, and Shania Wedderburn. So congratulations to them, our 2022 Roche Science Scholars. And I would be amiss if I didn't thank our science team. So we have a really amazing science team who are on the call. Uh, at the moment, Dr. Tracy Harney, Alnisha Simmons, Dr. Renya Jeffrey, Takia Martin, Tanika Hayward, and Leanne Hinton as well, who without all of them, we wouldn't have this really amazing dynamic science program at Bermuda College. So thank you to all of them. And thank you again, Miguel, for this amazing talk. We're just so, I can't explain to you how proud we are to see you just pursue this career and your passion and just follow your dream. It's so amazing to watch, and we're just so happy for you.
No, thank
So
you for having me. It was great.
yeah, thank you so much, and good night to everyone. And hopefully, you all learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for attending.